Supposed cases of exorcism are appearing all over social media today, and Christian YouTubers are getting massive attention on interviews with exorcists and people who claim to have witnessed demonic activity.
She was speaking foreign languages, the room became cold, the room became hot, and for about a half an hour, she levitated.
How can a skeptically minded person make sense of this? To find out, I showed some of these videos to Dr. Joseph Laycock, a scholar of American religious history and new religious movements, who has written extensively on possession, exorcism, Satanism, and satanic panic. Having read Dr. Laycock's newest book, The Exorcist Effect, I knew he would have valuable insight on these reports of the so-called demonic.
So The Exorcist Effect is about the relationship between actual religious cultures and horror movies. And on one level, it's kind of the simple idea that life imitates art and art imitates life. But we've really tried to do kind of a micro-history and track the way that certain films, especially The Exorcist, The Omen, and Rosemary's Baby, sort of drew on existing religious ideas, but then disseminated those ideas into American culture, setting a stage for the satanic panic and the revival of exorcism as a common Christian practice.
All right, we're going to start with watching some popular videos on Instagram of deliverance ministry happening in real time.
All right.
No! What are you doing to him? I am God! You're God? How did you get inside of him? Whoa! No! Ah, he used to be in lust? He loves me! I don't think he does, or you wouldn't be standing right here. Are you the only one in him? No! How many? 70,000! The power of Jesus can get rid of all of you. Is he done with looking at that stuff? Yes. Then when I touch him, all of you come out. No! Fire! All of you, all of you, all of you, all of you, all of you. Fire! All the way out of his body. All of it, all of it, all of it, all of it. There you go. Shut up and come out of him. All of you. All of you. All of you.
All right. It's pretty intense. I think it's so dramatic that it's driven a lot of people in the comments to say, no, this is obviously fake. It's staged. It's this or that. And then there's, an equally passionate group of commenters that are saying, this is clearly real. I've experienced this myself. I know that guy. This is not fake. And I'm not so sure if I see it's completely real and the demons are really in play here, or it's fake and this is staged as the only options for understanding this. This naturalistic perspective, demons aren't real, is really only a starting point, not so much an end point to your understanding in demons, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I teach a class on exorcism at Texas State, this is something I push my students on, is I'll say, well, demons aren't real, so it wasn't demons, right? And I'll go, okay, but let's go further, right? There's more to explain here. So Brian Levac was a historian at the University of Texas, and he studied early modern demonology and witchcraft. And he is kind of agnostic about, okay, if we want a naturalistic explanation, is this simple fakery, which lots of people in society might have motivation to fake being possessed? Or are they truly experiencing being possessed because of mental illness or any number of other things and so forth? What he does conclude is whatever is happening, though, this is what he calls a cultural script. So before anything else, someone has to learn from their culture, what does a possessed person look like? How do they act? What are they supposed to do? And he noticed very early on, possessed Catholics don't act the same as possessed Protestants.
Right.
There are different things that they do. So once you realize it's a script, then what becomes the question is, where are they getting the script from? Who is training this person what to do when they're possessed?
Interesting. To me, I somewhat had that idea in mind when I first saw that clip, especially when the guy says there's 70,000 in him. And it's reminiscent of the Gerasene demoniac, right? We are Legion, which might be the most famous exorcism story outside of modern literature.
Well, and Mary Magdalene has 7 demons in the Gospels, so there seems to be some inflation going on here. In fact, even when he says it, he says 70,000.
Yeah.
Right? It's almost as if his brain is thinking that's not a big enough number. Bigger, bigger, bigger. Right?
You will speak What are you doing to her? Talk. You're going to take her destiny. How did you get inside of her? Her mom. What did her mom do? Shaman. You are a marine spirit, aren't you? You all water spirits. They dedicated her?
Yes. I know.
No, she's not. No, she's not. You demons are so funny. What do you see? Son of God. She sees a son of God. Then you know what that means. If you see me as a son of God, then you know what happens next, right?
No, we must keep her.
Listen, first of all, shut up. Second of all, come out of her! Mighty name of Jesus! Hey, can you hear me? Who do you love more than anything? You're free.
On that one, I am not as maybe put off as in the other one, just because I feel like I can see real genuine pain in her face. Maybe this is really a real problem that she's having, and this is if we apply that narrative of this is a social script, this is the way that she is trying to deal with whatever the problem is. What do you think? Is this something that people might go and do once they kind of learn the social script of deliverance?
Well, yeah, and you know, she says my mother was a shaman, and that's why I have a demon, basically. And as a religious studies scholar, this always makes me kind of sad, right? When someone grows up in some sort of indigenous tradition, or this is very common with people who grew up with, say, Santeria or something like this, and they become Christian, and then they come to see their parents' tradition as demonic and satanic. And part of this is an exorcist has to not only tell you have a demon, but tell you why you have a demon. Mm. And in the early modern period, in the Catholic tradition, you could have a demon for all the right reasons. It could be because you're so holy, you're so pious, that's why the demons have come for you. In the Protestant tradition, though, they're going to ask questions like, well, did you listen to a rock record? Did you use a Ouija board? Did you take a yoga class? If the answer to all those questions is no, then they have to go further back. And so they'll often go to things like, but were your parents witches? Were your parents shamans, and so forth. So there's this kind of bleaching effect of, right, all these kind of rich traditions sort of just become sources of demons, right? On the other hand, if you grow up in a household with things like shamanism, things like altered states of consciousness might be sort of a bit more natural, right, to fall into than they would be for someone who grew up in a more secular household. So it could be that the types of experiences that she's having or grew up with have kind of translated into this performance of possession that you're seeing here.
The journalist and author Tim Alberta is an example of a Christian who opposes this kind of silliness, fortunately. He describes and opposes the corruption and radicalization of American evangelicalism in his book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory: American Evangelicals in an Age of Extremism. Reading this book, I think you'll understand my allyship with certain Christians, even given my skepticism to others. And you can easily get the key ideas in this book in just 16 minutes by reading or listening to the excellent Blink found on Blinkist, this video's sponsor. The Blinkist app enables you to understand the most important things from over 6,600 nonfiction books and podcasts in just 15 minutes. I go through a lot of nonfiction books for my work on YouTube, and Blinkist is a tool that boosts my productivity and somehow also manages to be really enjoyable and relaxing. That's good production quality for you. The Blinkist app also lets you create spaces with your friends where you can add, share, and recommend titles from the Blinkist library all in one place. Even your friends without a Blinkist Premium subscription can access all titles in the space, which is very convenient. My buddy JJ McCullough and I share a lot of interests, so we have a space where we share titles. So, give Blinkist a try. Get a 7-day free trial and 40% off Blinkist Annual Premium just by clicking my link in the description below. Thanks, Blinkist. In The Exorcist Effect, you talk about this phenomenon called ostension that folklorists tend to discuss. You also talk about pseudo-ostension. I was wondering if you can define what ostension is and maybe delineate the difference for me between someone acting on a social script in this kind of context and acting out this ostension in ways you talk about in The Exorcist Effect.
Sure. So ostension is simply the idea that stories have a way of coming to life. So folklore used to be more of a serious academic discipline. There aren't departments of folklore anymore. It's sort of dying out, which is very sad. but they would study stories and the origins of stories that usually people would say were true, right? There really was a psycho with a hook that attacked that lover's point or whatever, right? And they would usually find it was actually the opposite. It was not that events were inspiring these legends, but that legends were inspiring these events. So one very clear case of that from here in Texas in the 1970s, there was already the rumor that on Halloween there are people who randomly poison children. As far as we know, this had never taken place. Mm-hmm. And then this guy in Houston gets a big life insurance policy on his son, feeds his son a pixie stick laced with strychnine, and his alibi is going to be, well, we all know that psychos poison kids for no reason on Halloween. He didn't get away with this. He was caught. He became known as the Candyman killer. But the story gave rise to the event. The story of people poisoning kids on Halloween became the basis of the event. The other example we talk about in The Exorcist Effect is in the 80s, some spring breakers from UT went into Matamoros, Mexico, and one of them was basically kidnapped and killed by a drug cartel as a human sacrifice by this figure named Adolfo Constanzo, who was practicing a very deviant, idiosyncratic version of Santeria for this drug cartel. And when everything came to light, all of his ideas about how to do Santeria came from the horror movie The Believers, which is this sort of racist depiction of this actual Afro-Cuban religion that practices human sacrifice. So the Hollywood version of this fake religion became the basis of an actual murder, right? Yeah. And of course, when this happened in the 80s, all the satanic panic fearmongers said, we told you, we've always told you, right? That these organized criminal satanic cults really exist, and this is the smoking gun. So ostension is you tell a story, and the story comes to life in a kind of strange way. And then Bill Ellis is a folklorist, and he said, well, there are lots of things that are sort of near this. So you could have quasi-ostension, which is something like if you find a dead cow and you can't figure out how the cow died, if you've heard legends of satanic cults, attack cows, you might conclude it's cultists. And it's always vultures. I've been contacted twice about this. It's always vultures, right? And then you can also have a form of ostension, pseudo-ostension, where you are, Bill Ellis would use the word having experiences. A less charitable person might say lying. But you're making up a story, right, which is drawing on these scripts that you've heard somewhere else. So in a lot of cases from the Satanic Panic, when people are saying, I'm having memories of my parents, and they have black candles, and there's a pentagram made of blood, and so forth, they're getting these ideas from somewhere. It's not from their memory, but it's probably horror movies or Satanic Panic literature that they've been exposed to somewhere.
So in a way, certain narratives that are discriminatory, kind of racist, can become ingrained in a certain culture. That culture then creates more stories about it. Those stories get more popular. People tend to think that this is something that actually happens, and then someone eventually makes it real in their own way. And then the effect of that, would it be wrong to say that the effect of that can be instances like this, where the woman is saying, the fact that my parents practiced some kind of folk tradition, the fact that my parents did something outside of Christianity is the reason why I am now in distress for such and such reason. And now the only hope is to take on the idea of the people who spread this narrative of inferiority of other religions in the first place, of certain kinds of Christians. Yeah,
so Brian Levoc's interpretation of this as a cultural script could be seen as one form of ostension, all right? This is a whole community of people who believe in demons, who believe in deliverance ministry. They know about these ideas from learning from other deliverance ministers or through stories or even just the Gospels. And then when they get together, the stories come to life, right? They play out according to a script that they all know. And there might be variations on the script, but it's more or less consistent with the stories that they've been trained in.
Right. This next clip is from a Christian YouTube channel that tends to lean more into more rigorous theology and philosophy, tries to be a bit more academic leaning. However, he does bring on, like many other Christian YouTubers do, exorcists to talk about their experiences. This is not an exorcist, but a man named Richard Gallagher, who is a psychiatrist. He's medically trained. He wrote this book that talks about how he's assisted and just experienced being alongside exorcists as they have worked. As you can see, with 300,000 views on this video, this is something that works pretty well on YouTube. A lot of people are interested.
I mean, I did highlight this case of a woman I called Julia. All the facts in that chapter are 100% accurate, other than the fact that I don't say where she's from. She was not from the New York area, nor do I give her real name. There were three amazing aspects of the case, which is one of the reasons I highlighted it in the book. And as a matter of fact, it's one of the reasons that they're making a Hollywood movie out of her. You may know the name Jason Blum. He's a big producer in Hollywood, and he told me this is one of the best stories he's ever seen for a movie. So careful where you tread. But I decided I would participate in a movie with him. I mean, it's a feature movie. It's not a documentary. So long story short, it's a fascinating case. It was fascinating to me because even in the view of the exorcists, including this Father Jacques, as well as another guy, another exorcist who was the chief exorcist, they said to me, Rich, this is a once-in-a-century case. I mean, even for a possession, this is the most flamboyant case they had ever seen. So I knew I was dealing with, I mean, I had to verify it myself, being a little skeptical. Having said that, it became obvious to me very quickly that she was possessed. I saw her in possessed states. So in any case, what I'm saying is her case was incredibly dramatic. They are going to make a movie out of it, which is okay with me. I mean, I'm not a particularly materialistic person. I don't really care about a movie being made, but I think it's probably going to do some good in publicizing this kind of dramatic case.
Is Julia the one where she levitated during an exorcism?
Yes, and again, I have talked to, and of course, it's been reported all throughout history, not just in possessions, by the way, but also by occultists and sometimes even in the lives of saints. The question is, does that in the lives of saints, does that come from God or does that come from some kind of demonic trick? That's a whole nother controversy. But the fact of the matter is, 8 or 9 people, including a couple of nurses and salt of the earth people, as well as the 2 priests, obviously, they all swore to me that for a half an hour during the exorcism, which was quite dramatic. She had several exorcisms. This was the last one. Quite dramatic. She was speaking foreign languages. The room became cold. The room became hot. And for about a half an hour, all these salt of the earth people told me that she levitated out of the sort of comfortable chair that she was being held down on for about a half an hour, for about a foot off the air. They were convinced that if they didn't hold her down, which was very hard, and they were sweating to hold her down, that if they didn't hold her down, she would have risen to the ceiling or something.
So it's time to talk about the title of the book and what it is named after. You talk about this feedback loop that you call the exorcist effect. In the book, The Exorcist Effect, what is that feedback loop?
Well, so horror has always sort of insisted that this is based on a true story, right? I mean, going back to the very beginnings of the genre in the late 1700s. And so if you want to make a horror movie, you kind of have to tell people this is real, or it's based on true events, and so forth. And with William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist, it was based on this case that happened in Maryland and then in St. Louis. When we looked into it, it's actually mostly from his imagination, but the conceit of it's based on this one case and things like this could really happen, that really captured the imaginations of people. And what it's hard for people who are not baby boomers to understand is that when The Exorcist came out in 1973, the whole country lost their minds. I mean, people were fainting in movie theaters and vomiting. And I show this movie to my students, and they're like, "This is corny.
It's
like,
pretty
this
mild,
is,
yeah.
This is MST3K, right?" So of course that inspired other people to believe, well, am I just feeling anxious or am I possessed, right? And so they go to the Catholic Church and they want to get an exorcism, and just like in the film, the church doesn't know what to do. That's not something that they do anymore. But then they start going to the Pentecostals and the evangelicals. And so the Catholic Church changed its calculus. They said, well, we've been suppressing exorcism in America because it's embarrassing, but now we're going to lose people because we're not doing the exorcism. So the church really flips on this, right? And then as they flip on it, you start to get more exorcisms, right? And then some of those are spectacular, like the one that Gallagher is describing here. And so then people swoop in to get the movie rights, right? So Father Gabriel Amorth was kind of single-handedly responsible for exorcism gaining some traction again in Rome in the Curia. And he said, my favorite movie is The Exorcist. And he was a priest before that movie came out, and then he got into exorcism. And as we were writing the book, they announced that Russell Crowe is now going to play Father Amorth in this totally ridiculous, silly movie that was panned by the Exorcist organization that he founded. But it is kind of ironic, right? It was sort of, you reap what you sow, right? You kind of made this almost Faustian deal with Hollywood, and now you've lost control of how it's presenting your religion.
So there's this vicious cycle between just horror stories and specifically horror movies and actual perceived, at least, cases of possession, exorcism, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. And it's not that people don't know the difference between movies and real life, but movies are giving you models of things that might really happen, right? So almost everybody has probably been in an emergency situation or thinking about something that could happen, and somebody will say, well, that's only in movies, right? Like if someone starts having a seizure, right, unless you specifically train for this, you're probably going to do something that you've seen in a movie, and it might be the wrong thing, right? Or if you hear there's been a prowler spotted around your neighborhood, and you start thinking about self-defense, you're probably going to think of things that you saw on television or something like this. And so it's the same way with things about the supernatural, right? If you are up at 3 a.m. and you hear a noise that you don't recognize, your mind will start saying, well, you've seen models of this, right? And depending on your personality, you might say, well, that's absurd. It couldn't be that. Or you might say, gosh, maybe I need to talk to my pastor, or I need to talk to someone who knows about the spirit world. Maybe they can help me figure out what's going on. So they do affect the way people perceive reality, but in this kind of indirect way.
We'll get into that a little bit more, but first I want to watch one more clip from our deliverance minister friend, a clip from him on a podcast talking about one of his experiences.
Okay.
I remember I went to the Rainbow People. A lot of people don't know who they are. No, it isn't what you think, man. It's the old hippie. So it's the hippie movement that's continued on through the children of the hippies. It's just become very demonic, man.
Yeah.
And they go into the woods in different areas. Like here in Florida, they go to Ocala Forest. Yeah, they go to the middle of nowhere. And I remember I went deep into the forest where they were. And I would go meet some Christians out there that would meet with these people. Man, I saw the craziest stuff, man. There was a girl sitting around the campfire that came to the Christian area. And I prayed for this woman, like went crazy with a demon on the inside of her and got set free. And to this day, I'm like, Lord, just set that woman free. I wonder where she's at today. This was back in like 2014.
Wow.
And she was like crawling. There was a fire there. We had to keep her from going in the fire and all that stuff. It was pretty crazy. There's some really demonized folks in those forests, man. You think you're going to a horror movie in some ways, and you might not come back out.
I want to talk about this term that you discuss in The Exorcist Effect. The sociologist Peter Berger uses this term, a plausibility structure, and he uses that in reference to horror movies specifically. I feel like that's what's going on here. Can you kind of unpack that for me?
Yeah, so Peter Berger was very interested in the social construction of reality. And so he thought a lot about how human beings don't know what they're supposed to be doing, right? Whereas like beavers know, I've got to go find wood and make a dam out of it. Humans aren't like that. So they have to kind of make up a way that the world is supposed to work, and then trick themselves into thinking this is the only way that the world could possibly ever work. And for Peter Berger, that's what religion is. It's us building that kind of artificial set of rules to live in, because we need some set of rules to function in. And so plausibility structures for Peter Berger would be anything that kind of is your culture provides to kind of reinforce this is the way the universe really is. This is what the really real is. And it was a bit later that other sociologists said, if we're interested in things like demons, it seems that horror movies are providing a plausibility structure, that is one of the things that convinces your mind of this is a model of what could happen, right? That is realistic. And so when he says I'm going off into the woods of Florida to meet these demonized people. I mean, first of all, the Rainbow Tribe is this totally kind of benign group. We've covered them in the journal that I edit. Some of their lack of precautions during COVID were a bit controversial, but they're not this kind of cannibalistic, demon-possessed group that he's clearly describing them as. But to me, this sounds like folk horror movies, right? This is films like The Wicker Man or Blood on Satan's Claw or even, what's the one in Scandinavia? Midsummer, right?
Yeah.
He's drawing on all these tropes, and even if you've never seen those movies, even if you've just heard of them, or you've kind of clicked past them late at night on cable television, you have this model in your head of, bad things happen with weird people out in the forest. And so by extension, this guy is a hero, right? He willingly put himself in that danger and actually helped cast out demons from these demonic cultists.
It was interesting how little detail he really gave, but how vivid of a picture I had in my mind of that scene. When he's saying, we're in the woods, we're around the campfire, and it was like a horror movie. You're right. I've watched so many horror movies, and it's so easy for me to see a vivid picture of that. And I imagine that for other people who see this with a paradigm that is much more religiously loaded and spiritually significant than I do, they've got to see an even more vivid image when they hear something like this, I've got to think.
Yeah, and Richard Jenkins is a sociologist at Baylor, and he wrote an essay about the West Memphis 3 case, where these 3 teenagers were accused of being Satanists. And he said, this trope goes all the way back to Pulp Fiction of the 1920s, because that was the first time you had more Americans living in cities than in rural areas for the first time in our history. And suddenly, rural people came to be seen as not only kind of benighted and uneducated, but dangerous and mysterious. And so figures like H.P. Lovecraft very quickly kind of homed in on this idea of, New Yorkers are not going to worship Cthulhu. He tried writing a story like that. It was not one of his best stories. But out in the bayou in Louisiana, or kind of in remote, kind of inbred parts of New England, that's where these really awful cults are going to flourish. And so that idea has been in the American consciousness for a full century now, before this guy has this experience in Florida.
Okay, our next clip is going to be a Catholic podcast that, again, tends to get pretty low views, however, gets a lot more views when she brings on people like this friar that we're going to look at. He has done some exorcisms, and he's primarily here in this interview to talk about what he knows about demons, demonology, angels, things like that. So we're going to check out this clip.
How does it happen that someone becomes possessed?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are a lot of ways. There can be everything from dabbling in the occult. Ouija boards are extraordinarily dangerous. Ways of opening oneself up to demonic forces that are already out there waiting and giving them an opportunity to enter into one's life. That can be through curses or things cast upon you from the outside. It can be with dabbling with the occult of your own choice. Hypnosis is extraordinarily dangerous. In this particular,
any kind?
I think any kind. I think it's very dangerous. Any place where we relinquish our own control of our interior life and allow other things outside of us to manipulate that, like a hypnotist or astral projection, all of these things where people are thinking, I'm going to try to surrender myself to something outside of me who is not Jesus Christ. There are plenty of forces out there who are saying, I'll come and be your friend.
One should not surrender themselves to anything but this one religion. It's all right to surrender yourself to this religion, but all of these other things will lead you to being infested with some kind of supreme evil. This feels like a way to structure society in the way that you want.
Yeah, absolutely, right? If in the humanities we would call this, the hermeneutics of suspicion. But absolutely, when he's saying, don't expose yourself to any sort of other ideas or surrender yourself to anything other than us, right? There's a very clear sociological function to that. And he may be deploying us in a very cynical way, knowing that's what he's doing, or he may truly believe this and that's simply the effect of what he's doing. But this is also kind of ironic because when you watch Pentecostals get filled with the Holy Spirit, they are losing control, right? They are ceding all control from an anthropological perspective. That is spirit possession.
Yeah.
Right? But he's saying, well, it's fine when we do it, right? But if anybody other than us does it, even if it's just a hypnotist who's trying to get you to not crave cigarettes anymore, then it's deeply dangerous. So the other thing that's kind of ironic here that happens a lot with demonology is they begin to resemble the thing that they preach against. So he's talking about things like astral projection. Well, generally, the Catholic Church has not said that astral projection is real. That's not a thing that they worry about. Yeah. But he ironically ends up beginning to promote these occult discourses that he's claiming to be crusading against.
We'll absolutely get into that at the end of the video. The craziest clip that we're going to talk about, I've saved for the end. But for right now, let's watch another one from this.
We have these names of what we've understood to be kind of the 5 generals of the underworld, sort of those demons that are most closely associated with Lucifer and are just like the angels are arranged in a hierarchy, the demons are arranged in a hierarchy as well, subservient to one another and so forth. They ape everything that's good. They mimic and ape everything that's good, like the sacraments, like the fact that abortion is the sacrament of this world. So, with the sexual revolution, the demon Baal, that's one of the demons we know about, that ancient, awful god from the Old Testament. That was the work of Baal, which was about sexual promiscuity, fornication, the severing of all of these important family ties like marriage, so that sexual promiscuity and the whole sexual revolution that we saw in this country in the 60s was the work of Baal and his minions. Very successful in that, with all of the divorcing of human intimacy from the act of procreation. So that's artificial contraception, the no-fault divorce, all of these things. And that was to pave the way for then the next demons of these generals who could come and do their work. Asmodeus, that's a biblical name, who is the demon of male homosexuality. And so further...
That's not politically correct to talk about.
No, of course it's not. But it's true, because if we do, what is human intimacy for? It's for the procreation of children between one man and one woman. God has blessed that with a covenant that we call holy matrimony, right? That's what human sexuality is for. And for the intimacy of the spouses, but especially for procreation. So it has to at least be open to the procreation of children, even if that's not what's going to happen because of infertility or all kinds of things. So male homosexuality was the work of Asmodeus, run rampant in our culture, and follows upon, as you can see, if human sexuality and promiscuity degenerates, then you can open the world to male homosexuality. Following shortly upon that is Leviathan, the demon Leviathan, who is the demon of female homosexuality, of that kind of masculine slant. Followed quickly by Lilith, the demon of female homosexuality, of the more kind of seductive femme fatale sort. Followed quickly, as we've seen so much, by Bahamut, the demon of abortion. Because once all of that human sexuality has completely degenerated, what's the end in view? The abortion of the killing of God's most innocent and weakest and most beautiful creatures.
And we know these names because exorcists have actually heard the devil, the demons admit.
Yes, that's
that
how we know
they are
this.
that demon, or they're commanded by that general demon.
One or the other.
Wow.
One or the other.
I think something that makes this stuff so attractive is that this story that they're telling of this hierarchy really gives a kind of transcendent, eternal moral order to the world. It's such a clear picture of what's right and what's wrong, and there are literal good guys and bad guys, like these supernatural supervillains that are behind all of the things that we don't like. Do you think that that's a particularly enticing feature of, or prominent feature of, these kind of demonic systems that people preach?
Well, I just have to say, I hope the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith watches that video, because I think from a Catholic perspective, that was heresy.
Yeah.
That we just saw. Nothing that he was saying was based in Catholic tradition or the Bible. It was all based in private revelation, right? It was, well, I think this person was possessed by a demon, and they confessed the story about Baal, which, first of all, you're not supposed to trust demons. That's the Catholic Church has said this over and over again. Even if a demon is really talking to you, it's not reliable intelligence.
Yeah.
My dissertation was on a group of Catholics who said that the Virgin Mary was appearing to them and talking about the end of the world. And the church said, well, that's a private revelation. It has to be handled very carefully. And here he is kind of spouting all this stuff, right? That's also embarrassing from kind of a biblical studies perspective. He's taking these personages from the Old Testament, or some of them are not. I think he was trying to say Baphomet, which is not a biblical character at all, and then applying these totally bizarre associations with them. So I guess there was a femme lesbian demon and like a butch lesbian demon. Is that what
Something
he said?
like that.
And then Asmodeus, who appears in the Book of Tobit and kills grooms on their wedding night so he can have the bride to himself, is for some reason the demon of male homosexuality. I mean, it just seems like they're just playing this sort of mix and match a game. But anyways, a lot of what he was saying, you were asking about the appeal. I do think the appeal is I know something that other people don't know. I know this kind of secret conspiracy lore about what the demons are up to, their hierarchies and so forth. And so, yeah, I do think that people feel a lot of pleasure knowing that kind of stuff and knowing those kind of list of misfortunes. For his perspective, these are all misfortunes. Open sexuality, access to reproductive rights, tolerance of sexual orientation, and sort of mapping them out and giving them all a name. So I think that's what's appealing to people.
Yeah. It's kind of like he's collecting all the Infinity Stones and presenting what each one is about. Like, this is the space one, this is the power one, this is the gay one, this is the lesbian one, this is the abortion one. And with that, you're able to lay out this story that it's honestly very easy to communicate a powerful moral message if you use literal characters rather than trying to give some kind of philosophical moral argument for why something is wrong. To me, that seems to be one of the reasons why people like to take on and retell these stories when they hear them in videos like this. It's so easy to communicate what you think is right and wrong from this.
Yeah, and David Frankfurter was one of my mentors, and in his book Evil Incarnate, he shows that this actually predates Christianity. You have Zoroastrian exorcisms, and they're all about lists. Exorcists love to make lists, and they have since the beginning of time. So it's not just I banish all the demons, but I banish you, demon of plague. I banish you, demon of my house catching fire. I banish you, demon of miscarriage, right? You take all the bad stuff that you don't want and you make it into a list, and then you do this ritual to show I, the exorcist, have control over all of this, right? I have the power to see the hidden connections behind all these misfortunes and to deal with it. And we're doing the exact same thing, 4,000 years later. Nothing has changed.
Right. Okay, so for some people, this will be the moment that they've been waiting for. We're going to talk about a clip from a channel called Randy K. Now, this guy, Randy K, the host, has written books about his near-death or death experiences where he dies, he goes to heaven, he sees all of these magical, wonderful things in heaven, he comes back to share his story. Now, his guests that he has on his YouTube show have often not gone to heaven, they've gone to hell, or they have experienced satanic ritual abuse. They've experienced bad things, and they have come on to talk about that with Randy as he smiles, nods, and says, "Oh my." So let's check out a pretty wild clip from an interview with a guest that experienced satanic ritual abuse.
You were essentially, I'll use the term bred, to have children, one of which would be sacrificed by this cult. So I know this is going to be hard. Again, for our audience, you're praying for Cheryl. She is one of the most courageous people I have ever met in my entire life to be with us today to share this terrible occurrence. But back to what happened and the ultimately the sacrifice of your own child.
Right. So the ages for pedophiles is 4 to 10 is what they prefer for the small children. So after the age of 10, then I was prepped between the ages of 10 and 11 with hormones to get pregnant and to be bred, because for my father to move up into the hierarchy and become a high priest, he had to sacrifice a perfect male child from his family. My mom was unable to carry boys. And so this is why I was used now to have the baby boy that would help him arise into the hierarchy. So at 12, I had my first baby, and it was a girl. And she was taken from my arms, and they laughed and said, "Tell her goodbye." It was a home birth. I had been married to a 13-year-old boy in the cult to make a baby, and I had the girl. And from the things I overheard, the parents of the young man were supposed to adopt her and keep her. And then at the age of 15, I was pregnant again. And this time I did carry the baby to full term. I was having the birth pains, but I didn't know I was pregnant. The mind control is so thorough with your different alter personalities, with amnestic walls between them, that you don't realize you're pregnant. And I was so quiet. And I was a selective mute. I didn't trust anybody. The whole town was involved, so I didn't trust people. And I was gaining weight, but I had gained weight before and with my first pregnancy, so I was just a fat, introverted kid that nobody would think was dating somebody or could get pregnant. So that was not part of the deal. Anyhow, I did do things subconsciously, like write baby names over and over and over again. I don't know why I was obsessed with suddenly writing baby names, from the damage of trafficking. There wasn't any interruption in the menstrual cycle. I still had that happening from time to time, but it wasn't normal from all the damage already. So I wouldn't know. So they induced labor at the doctor's office in the middle of the night on the fall equinox. And excuse me. And lo and behold, I had the baby boy. It was a very complicated birth. They tried to do like a spinal on me, and it wasn't a doctor, it wasn't an anesthesiologist. So it was just horror on my back. And then the baby was born, and the room erupted into cheers. My father was there, and his staff was there in the cheers because it was a baby boy. And immediately they started planning his death. Mm-hmm. And I'm overhearing it while I'm still on the cot where I gave birth. So I started screaming and trying to push myself off. And my father came back to me, and he said the hypnotic code that would shut that altar down, and everything went to black again. And then for the next 3 months, he became my best friend. My father always hated me. He had nothing to do with me. And suddenly he was my best friend. He would sit down on the couch and talk to me about his life. And I actually got to the point where I felt, gosh, I think might be human. There might be a real person inside that, inside him. And all it was he had to monitor me to make sure I didn't remember that I'd had the baby. And they took the baby to the doctor's house, who had a well-renowned foster care for infants. And that's where he lived for 3 months. And they planned the sacrifice for Christmas Eve at the stroke of midnight. Of course, I didn't know the plans because they had, blanked me out. My paternal grandmother flew out from the Midwest to be there. This is Christmas Eve of 1976. And it was an outdoor ritual. And they worship the god Kronos. It has nothing to do, with Jesus or anything else. They're sacrificing to the god Kronos and Lucifer. And they had taken me, and I was restrained in a certain way, very vile way, and had my eyes taped open, had long hair, and the man behind me wrapped it around. So I had to watch what happened to my baby.
Oh my.
And I thank God that it was over quickly for him. My hardest part was the 3 months he was alive. Did he ever feel loved? Did he ever feel cared for? That ate me up. But anyhow, he was sacrificed. There were things that happened with my father and the blood and things that I won't go into detail of. But we know from these satanic worshipers, they drink blood, they cannibalize, and they do all those kind of things. And that's what happened to my son. And then when they went to have their orgy, after every ritual, they have an orgy, and that's how the kids are abused during that time too. I was dragged over by the bonfire, and I was branded with a pentagram. And then I can remember crawling over to the altar, dragging myself to stand up and see what was on the altar. And there was nothing left of my baby except for 2 perfect little feet. And They usually make jewelry out of the bones and things. So anyhow, that was the end of that. I chose to become dead mommy, and I couldn't live with it. So I chose to die. But of course, that altar just went into a deep sleep and didn't remember anything. And that promoted my father into the hierarchy.
Where to start with that?
Oh my.
These channels definitely make a big deal of this stuff. This is really dangerous. Viewer discretion is advised. You need to be careful. You don't need to play with these things because they're so life and death serious. But then they also make tons of videos where you get very graphic explanations, very R-rated, if not even more than that could hardly be shown in horror movies sometimes. And this is Christian content. You talk about a bit in The Exorcist Effect how people will kind of play with this type of almost taboo kind of spirituality, the dark side of their religion, through this kind of discussion of like satanic ritual abuse and things like that. Can you unpack kind of the irony of saying this is terrible, don't talk about it, so we're going to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, my students even noticed this when we read The Demonologist about Ed and Lorraine Warren, and they're saying, well, even thinking about demons can cause demons to come and possess you. And so read our book about demons, and you'll be thinking about them for, 10 hours or something. And it just doesn't make any sense. If they believed what they said, they would have never published this book. I said, okay, that's a good point. So what do you think's the real reason they published the book, right? So yeah, I think that there is definitely a kind of prurient interest in all of this, right? That people are kind of titillated by these discussions of orgies and violence and so forth, and they've kind of given themselves an excuse to talk about it because of their, if this will prevent even one satanic orgy, then it's worth talking about it on YouTube for scores of hours.
Yeah, he has this very sweet little voice where he's saying, oh no, we're all praying for you. But essentially the content is porn.
Right.
Like this is a stag film being described, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was looking for sort of the earliest films depicting black masses, what I found was these old French stag films. And it's the exact same story, except he's talking about it to show how horrible it is happening to Christians. And in Paris in 1928, you were watching it because it was sexy.
Yeah.
But it's the same story.
Yeah. I want to make sure and say this before we go further with this. In these cases of satanic ritual abuse, you never want to say, nothing happened, you were never abused, that kind of thing. Because we know that abuse is rampant in religious and non-religious contexts. So to say that this woman just obviously wasn't abused because this is such a crazy story, I think can get us into a place where we don't really want to be, just saying, we're going to hand wave this away. That said, there is a conspiracy theory, there is a trend when it comes to satanic ritual abuse. We've talked about Michelle Remembers before, which is rather thoroughly debunked cash grab type of narrative that made this kind of abuse story get very, very popular for a while in the 70s, 80s, and even to today, honestly. In these stories, it seems like children are really often brought up, whether it's babies or whether it's adolescents who are being tortured and impregnated, these kinds of things. Now, in your book, you say that the religion scholar David Frankfurter observed that evil conspiracies are frequently imagined as intrinsically parasitical, needing our children to perpetuate themselves. Can you unpack that for me?
Sure. So this trope of the bad guys are preoccupied with our babies. Again, this predates Christianity. If you read kind of Roman claims about what Christians did, they said, there's an initiation ritual to become a Christian where they show you this loaf of bread shaped like a baby, and they just say, just beat this loaf of bread with a bat, and then you're a Christian. And of course, it wasn't just a loaf of bread. There was a baby inside. So, well, now you're a murderer. So if you ever snitch on us Christians, you're in it, you're ride or die now with the Christians. So Frankfurter's question is, why for thousands of years have we said there's this conspiracy of people living amongst us? They look like everybody else, but they actually eat babies. And so what he notices is these behaviors attributed to the conspiracy, it's a reversal of our values, right? So we would all help a baby. We would do pretty much anything we could if there was a baby right in front of us to help preserve its life, but they do the opposite. And it's other things too, right? So we watch this friar say, oh, well, the demons, they mock everything good. So if angels have a hierarchy, they have a hierarchy. And if we have sacraments, they have sacraments. Everything is flipped. Brian Levac has even found woodcuts of witches where they're standing before Satan and it looks like they're limboing, they're bending backwards. But it's because in medieval culture, you would bow to show respect for a king. So they're backwards bowing, right? And so Frankfurter kind of concludes that it seems like the purpose of all of this is to conjure this sort of mirror world where everything that we do is backwards and hideously evil, and that this serves to kind of reinforce that the way that we do things must be the correct and only possible way to do it, because when the way that we do things are flipped, look how hideous it is. It's the worst thing imaginable. And so paradoxically, these horrible stories about eating children and orgies are comforting, are reassuring, because they let us know we are the good guys. We are on the right side of all of this.
An unfortunate effect of those stories being spread is just to, as we've talked about before, it really muddies the waters when you're trying to actually investigate claims of abuse, because it is a real problem. I mean, we see tons of news stories come out about human trafficking, and then you have somebody talking about how, well, the human trafficking all has to do with getting adrenochrome, and it's this whole QAnon thing. And then when you say, no, I don't think the adrenochrome thing is happening, then they say, what, you don't care about children being trafficked? You're anti talking about human trafficking? And you have to then defend yourself and say, no, I just don't buy into these conspiracy theories, and I think they make it difficult to actually get down to the heart of the matter, making justice really get done, figuring out what the truth really is.
Yeah, I mean, one chapter of this book, we did a real deep dive into Ed and Lorraine Warren. And with one of the people that they exorcised, he was arrested for essentially raping his daughter. And Ed Warren tried to say it wasn't him, it was an incubus in his form. Right? So we really have a very literal case of using this language of demonic conspiracy theories to try to let a man get away with raping his daughter. So I think these stories are really a double tragedy, right? On the one hand, they are getting innocent people arrested for crimes that they didn't do and that possibly never occurred. But on the other hand, they're also exonerating people who probably actually are committing kind of less spectacular everyday forms of abuse. And that abuse is never really investigated or healed in a healthy way.
This is anecdotal, just from my experience being a content creator. But, I'm seeing every day videos like this pop up, and they get hundreds of thousands of views, sometimes multiple millions of views. Christian content creators that I know and that I respect also see other Christian content creators that they don't care for all that much getting way more views than anything about the gospel on just talking about demons and the occult and kind of delivering this pornography in a way. And, you've talked about before how in the 1960s, when the secularization narrative started to get really big, as we modernize, as we get more scientifically advanced, religion inevitably fades away. People start to react to that and get really into the occult. LaVey starts the Church of Satan. You have bands like Coven get popular, things like that. Today, we're seeing the largest group of non-religious people in America in recent memory. Gen Z is the least religious generation in recent memory. I guess my question is it too far off to say that there might be some parallel between what we saw in the 60s and, today? Is the same thing happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about. A common theory in the history of religions is that Protestantism in Europe, when it began attacking Catholicism for having saints and apparitions and things, and for exorcism, for the kind of this sort of wild culture of exorcism that existed in the Middle Ages, it sort of stripped the world of supernatural entities. It said there's humans here on earth and there's God up in heaven, and that's it. There's nothing else in between. And some historians have even said, well, that kind of set the stage for the scientific revolution, and eventually just saying, actually, it's just us humans on earth, right? Some sociologists have said Protestantism dug its own grave, right, in that sense. So I think that's the moment that we were at in the 60s. I think what we're seeing now is, for better or worse, human beings really do need to share their universe with demons and saints and angels and fairies and aliens and ancestors and all those kinds of things. that religion scholar Robert Orsi calls presence, the presence of other things. And so I think, lots of the so-called nuns, they talk about interacting with supernatural beings or light language or CE5, where they're contacting aliens and so forth. Skeptics can say all of that seems very unhealthy and so forth. I do think it's better than demons, though. I do think it's saying everything bad that happens is caused by a basically invisible conspiracy of the worst things you could ever imagine, and only this church has the power to deal with any of it. I think that's probably the worst of all possible worlds. I'd rather either live in a skeptical Star Trek Enlightened type society or a magical pagan society than one where everything is this kind of massive spiritual warfare between the church and the demons.
I guess I would rather someone attribute the way that I make videos and my whole life and personality and content to the fact that I'm a Gemini rather than to the fact that I'm possessed by demons and obviously have made a contract with the devil.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Joseph Laycock, thank you so much for joining me on this one. Where can we pick up The Exorcist Effect?
The Exorcist Effect, you can get it through Amazon or you can get it directly through Oxford University Press.
All right. I highly, highly recommend the book. I read the book and raved about it so much that my wife picked it up and now she loves it. And we were telling our friends about it. Definitely pick it up. Thanks again. I'll see you again soon, I hope.
Yeah, thanks. This was really fun.
Thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support. If you want to hear more from me, then subscribe. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.